I want to expand this conversation to policing and what seems to be an increasing military edge to policing. And for that, I'm joined by Radley Balko. He is the author of Rise of the Warrior Cop, The Militarization of America's Police Forces. He's also an opinion journalist with the Washington Post. He joins me from Nashville. Radley Balko, welcome to the NewsHour. Thank you very much. So we're talking about what you call the warrior cop. Are we seeing the blurring of the lines between the warrior, the soldier, and the traditional police officer?
I think we are, and it's been a continuation of a trend that we've seen since about the 1980s. In this country, we have a long tradition of respecting the line between police and military, and with good reason. A soldier's job is to kill people and break things, is to annihilate a foreign enemy. Police officer's job is to keep the peace and protect constitutional rights. When you blur the two, when you take police officers and you train them like soldiers and arm them and dress them like soldiers, and you tell them they're fighting a war, whether it's on crime or terrorism or drugs or Antifa, pick your villain. We shouldn't be surprised when we see some of the images that we've seen over the past few days, where police officers are treating the people they serve like, almost like an enemy combatant rather than citizens with rights.
And does it go both ways? Does arming police like soldiers change the psychology of how a police officer acts and the psychology of how a protester might interact with that police officer?
Absolutely. For the book, I interviewed a number of police chiefs, both current and retired. And one thing that sort of came out of those interviews was that when you respond to a protest with officers in riot gear, when you respond to protests with these kind of masked, nameless faces that kind of represent everything that the protesters are protesting against, not only are the protesters dehumanized in the eyes of the officers, they're because they've been sort of trained to think more like soldiers. The police officers themselves are dehumanized in the eyes of protesters, and it's important. I think that police chiefs, heads of police agencies, try to sort of humanize both sides.
And we've seen police officers even take a knee with some of the protesters and, like you said, listen, and that will often diffuse the situation. We've also seen some of the opposite tactics, quite aggressive tactics from police officers against protesters. Why do we see these kinds of incidents around the country, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think on one side, people are angry, and on the other side, I think you have police departments that have increasingly been kind of not only taught to sort of think more like soldiers and approach their jobs like soldiers and take kind of a very us versus them mentality to the job, but I think during the Trump administration over the last 3 years, you have a president at the very top who has encouraged police brutality when speaking to police organizations, who has lashed out at the media. We've seen more attacks on journalists by police, direct attacks, knowing attacks over the last few days than we've seen in the last several years.
We're also seeing the militarization of the police in terms of what they wear. And you mentioned the Trump administration making different rhetorical decisions. There's also a policy change after Ferguson. The Obama administration curtailed some of the military equipment that police officers could purchase. Have those purchases grown since the Trump administration allowed more police departments to purchase military equipment?
And so the program you're talking about is the 1033 program. And by the time the Obama administration rolled it back, it was almost kind of a symbolic move because a lot of police groups were getting their agencies were getting their equipment through DHS and through other programs. But it was a kind of an important move symbolically. And one thing the Obama administration did that they got a lot of ridicule for, I think unfairly, is that they paid a lot of attention to symbolism. They cut off the really sort of aggressive, made for battlefield type weapons, but they also said anything that was painted camouflage, for example, would have to be repainted if the domestic police organizations were going to use it. And as I said, they got a lot of ridicule for that. I think it was actually a very smart decision because it showed that they were aware of the mindset problem, of the idea that cops need to see themselves as part of the communities they serve. They need to see themselves as there at a protest, but in particular to protect the rights of the people who are protesting. And when you dress in camouflage and you start thinking of yourself as a soldier and the people you're supposed to be protecting as the enemy, it's hard to act as a police officer is supposed to act. You tend to act more like we see a soldier on a battlefield.